Sometimes the smallest act of mercy can change the course of history. In 1887, a lonely farmer made a choice that would either save his life or end it. This is the story of Samuel Reed and the night that changed everything. What would you do if helping a stranger meant risking everything you've ever known? Stay with us to discover how one man's courage awakened an ancient bond of honor. The Wyoming wind howled like a wounded animal as Samuel Reed secured the last of his fence posts against the approaching storm. At 52, his hands bore the calluses of 30 years working this unforgiving land, and his weathered face told the story of countless battles against nature's fury. The farm that had once echoed with his wife Martha's laughter and their children's voices now stood silent, a monument to dreams buried 6 years ago with the fever that took his family. Lightning split the darkening sky as Samuel hurried toward his modest farmhouse, its windows glowing warmly against the approaching tempest. He'd learned to find comfort in routine, evening chores, a simple supper, and the company of his old hound, Jeremiah. But tonight something felt different. The air carried more than the scent of rain. There was tension, fear, something that made the hair on his neck stand on end. As he reached for the barn door to check on his livestock one final time, a sound made him freeze. Not the usual rustling of hay or gentle lowing of cattle, but something distinctly human. Ragged breathing, the whisper of movement in the shadows. Samuel's hand instinctively moved to the rifle he kept mounted by the door, but something stayed his reach. Instead, he called out softly, "I know you're in there. No need to be afraid." The breathing stopped entirely. Samuel waited, counting heartbeats before trying again. "This storm's fixing to be a bad one. Whatever trouble you're running from, it can wait till morning." Slowly, he pushed open the barn door, holding his lantern high. The golden light revealed his horses shifting nervously in their stalls, and there, huddled behind a stack of hay bales, was a sight that made his breath catch. A young girl, no more than 16, crouched like a cornered animal. Her dark hair hung in wet tangles around a face marked by exhaustion and terror. What struck Samuel most wasn't her obvious native heritage, though he knew that alone spelled danger in these parts, but her eyes. They held the same hollow look he'd seen in his own mirror after Martha died, the gaze of someone who'd lost everything that mattered. "Easy now," Samuel murmured, setting down his lantern and raising both hands peacefully. "Name's Samuel Reed. This is my land, my barn, but I'm not fixing to hurt you." The girl's eyes darted toward the door, calculating escape routes, but the thunder outside seemed to convince her that shelter, even uncertain shelter, was better than the storm. "You speak English?" Samuel asked gently. She nodded once, barely perceptible. "Good. You hungry?" Another nod, this one accompanied by a visible swallow that told him she was likely starving. Samuel felt something stir in his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. "Well, then, seems to me the Christian thing would be to share what I got. Storm like this, nobody should be alone." As if summoned by his words, the wind outside reached a crescendo, rattling the barn walls and sending both horses and girl deeper into the shadows. Samuel made his decision then, one that would change everything. "Come on up to the house. Got stew on the stove and coffee that'll warm you through. Morning comes, we'll sort out whatever trouble's chasing you." The girl studied his face in the lantern light, searching for deception, for the cruelty she'd clearly learned to expect. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her, because she slowly, carefully, rose from her hiding place. As she stepped into the light, Samuel noticed the torn fabric of her simple dress, the scratches on her arms, and most telling of all, the small leather pouch clutched in her trembling hands. Clearly something precious, something worth protecting. "What's your name, child?" he asked as they prepared to brave the short run to the house. Her response came as barely a whisper, carried away almost immediately by the wind. "Ayanna." Samuel nodded gravely, as if she'd entrusted him with a sacred secret. "Well, Ayanna, welcome to Reed Farm. Tonight you're under my protection." Neither of them could have imagined that by dawn, that protection would be reinforced by 50 Lakota warriors. Dawn arrived gray and reluctant, filtered through clouds that promised more rain. Samuel woke to find Ayanna gone from the kitchen where she'd slept by the stove, and for a moment, he wondered if the previous night had been a dream. Then he spotted her through the window, sitting perfectly still beside Martha's flower garden, watching the sunrise with an intensity that spoke of prayers or meditation. The sound of approaching horses shattered the morning peace. Samuel stepped onto his porch as Sheriff Wade Morrison led a group of 6 men up the dusty path to his farm. Morrison was a man whose cruelty was matched only by his ambition. He'd arrived in Wyoming territory 3 years ago with a reputation for harsh justice and a talent for exploiting fear. Behind him rode Tom Bradley, the general store owner, along with several other townsmen Samuel recognized but wouldn't call friends. "Morning, Samuel," Morrison called out, his voice carrying the false friendliness of a snake oil salesman. "Beautiful morning after that storm. Hope you didn't suffer any damage." His eyes were already scanning the property, searching. "Nothing I can't handle," Samuel replied evenly, stepping down from the porch. "What brings you out so early, Sheriff?" Bradley spurred his horse forward, his face flushed with indignation. "That little savage stole from my store yesterday evening, took near $20 worth of goods and disappeared like smoke. Morrison here says she might have taken shelter somewhere out this way." Samuel kept his expression neutral, though his heart quickened. "What makes you think anyone came this direction?" "Tracks," Morrison said, dismounting and walking closer to the porch. "Leading right to your property, matter of fact. Now, I know you to be an honest man, Samuel, but these are dangerous times. Indians getting bold, stealing from honest folk. Can't have that kind of lawlessness." From the corner of his eye, Samuel saw Ayana freeze beside the garden. She was partially hidden by Martha's old rose trellis, but if any of these men looked carefully, they'd spot her. "I haven't seen anyone," Samuel said, the lie sitting heavy on his tongue. "But you're welcome to look around if it'll put your minds at ease." Morrison's smile was cold. "Appreciate that, Samuel, really do." He gestured to his men, who began spreading out across the yard. "Thing is, Bradley here is pretty shaken up. Says this girl was young, but she had that look in her eyes, you know the kind, wild, dangerous. Could have slit his throat easy as you please." Samuel studied Bradley's soft features and trembling hands. The man had probably never faced real danger in his life. "What exactly did she allegedly steal?" "Food mostly," Bradley admitted, his voice gaining strength from the sheriff's presence. "Dried meat, bread, some beans. But it's the principle of the thing. Can't have these savages thinking they can just take what they want from decent folks." The word savages hit Samuel like a physical blow, and he found himself thinking of Ayana's frightened eyes, her careful politeness when accepting his offer of food. $20 seems steep for beans and bread. Morrison stepped closer, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Are you questioning Tom's word, Samuel? Because that sounds mighty close to taking sides, and around here we remember who stands with civilization and who doesn't." The threat was clear, but Samuel had faced down worse than Wade Morrison. "I'm questioning the math, Sheriff, nothing more," one of Morrison's men called out from near the barn. "Sheriff, found something." He held up a piece of torn fabric that Samuel recognized as matching Ayana's dress. His blood ran cold as Morrison's expression shifted from suspicious to triumphant. "Well now," Morrison drawled, examining the fabric. "Looks like our little thief did pay you a visit after all, Samuel. Question is, where is she now?" His eyes swept the property again, this time with predatory focus. "Boys, spread out. Search everything, barn, house, root cellar. She's here somewhere." Samuel's mind raced. The house would be searched first, then the barn, then the outbuildings. Ayana's hiding spot by the garden wouldn't last long under a determined search. He needed to buy time, create a distraction, something. "Sheriff," Samuel said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd lived through the war between the states, "I'm going to ask you to step back and think carefully about what you're doing here." Morrison turned, his hand now openly resting on his pistol. "Is that a threat, Reed?" "It's a warning," Samuel replied calmly. "You're about to make a mistake that'll haunt this town for years to come. That girl, if she was even here, is nothing more than a hungry child. But you're treating this like she's Geronimo himself." "Hungry child?" Bradley scoffed. "She could have asked for food like a decent person instead of stealing it." Samuel's temper finally flared. "When's the last time any of you decent folks offered food to a native child? When's the last time you showed an ounce of Christian charity to anyone who didn't look exactly like you?" The words hung in the air like gunpowder, dangerous and volatile. Morrison's smile was purely predatory now. "Careful, Samuel. Sounding more and more like you're harboring a fugitive. That's a serious crime in these parts." As if on cue, one of Morrison's men shouted from the side of the house, "Found her!" The next few seconds moved like molasses. Samuel saw Ayanna burst from her hiding place, running toward the open prairie. He saw Morrison draw his weapon. He saw the other men mounting up for pursuit. And in that moment, Samuel Reed made the second decision that would change everything. He stepped directly into Morrison's line of fire. "You'll have to go through me first," he said quietly. The standoff lasted an eternity and a heartbeat. Then Morrison holstered his weapon with deliberate slowness. "Have it your way, Reed. But come tomorrow, I'll be back with a warrant and enough men to search every inch of this place. And when I find that girl, you'll be joining her in a cell." As the posse rode away, Samuel watched Ayanna disappear into the distance, her small form swallowed by the vast Wyoming landscape. He had no way of knowing that she wasn't running away from help. She was running toward it. Samuel spent a restless night knowing that Morrison would return with reinforcements and legal authority. He'd committed himself to a path that could cost him everything: his farm, his freedom, possibly his life. Yet as he sat in Martha's old rocking chair, watching the stars through the kitchen window, he felt more at peace than he had in years. For the first time since his family's death, he'd acted with purpose beyond mere survival. Dawn came too soon, announced by the thunder of hoofbeats. But as Samuel stepped onto his porch, his blood turned to ice. This wasn't Morrison's small posse returning. This was an army. Dozens of mounted warriors emerged from the morning mist like specters, their war paint gleaming in the early light. At their head rode a man whose very presence commanded respect. Tall, silver-haired, wearing the ceremonial regalia of a chief. Samuel's hand moved instinctively toward his rifle, then stopped. If these warriors meant him harm, he was already dead. Instead, he stepped down from his porch and stood in his yard, arms at his sides, waiting. The lead rider approached slowly, his dark eyes studying Samuel with an intensity that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "You are Samuel Reed," the chief said, his English precise and dignified. It wasn't a question. "I am," Samuel replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "And you are?" "I am White Eagle, chief of the Minneconjou Lakota. The girl you sheltered is my granddaughter." The words hit Samuel like a physical blow. All night, he'd wondered who Ayanna really was, why she seemed so important to Morrison. Now he understood. He'd harbored the granddaughter of one of the most powerful chiefs in the territory. "She told me what you did," White Eagle continued, dismounting with fluid grace despite his advanced years. "How you offered food, shelter, protection to a frightened child. How you stood between her and those who would do her harm." Samuel found his voice. Any decent person would have done the same. White Eagle's expression shifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but something warmer than the stern mask he'd worn moments before. "In my experience, Samuel Reed, decent people are far rarer than they should be, especially when the child in question has skin like mine." Around them, the other warriors remained mounted but relaxed, their weapons lowered. Samuel noticed they weren't painted for war as he'd first thought. The markings were ceremonial, formal. This wasn't a raiding party. It was an honor guard. "Ayanna is precious to me," White Eagle continued. "She is the daughter of my son who fell fighting the 7th Cavalry at Little Bighorn. Her mother died of the white man's spotted sickness 2 winters ago. She is all I have left of my bloodline." His voice carried the weight of profound loss, a grief Samuel recognized in his own bones. "She seemed like a good girl," Samuel said quietly. "Scared, hungry, but good. She didn't deserve what they were trying to do to her." "The sheriff and his men," White Eagle said, his voice hardening. "They will return today." Samuel nodded. "Morrison's not the type to let this go. He'll come back with papers, more men, legal authority. And you know this will mean your ruin." "I know it," Samuel admitted. "But I couldn't live with myself if I'd done different." White Eagle studied him for a long moment, then turned and spoke rapidly in Lakota to his warriors. Several dismounted and began moving with purposeful efficiency around Samuel's property. Others took positions that Samuel realized with growing amazement were defensive. They were setting up to protect his farm. "What are you doing?" Samuel asked. "Honoring a debt," White Eagle replied simply. "In our culture, Samuel Reed, there is no greater honor than protecting someone who cannot protect themselves. You showed such honor to my granddaughter. Now we show it to you. Before Samuel could respond, the sound of approaching horses announced Morrison's return. But where the sheriff expected to find a lone farmer, he instead discovered something that made his blood run cold. 50 Lakota warriors positioned defensively around Reed's property, their weapons ready, their expressions deadly serious. Morrison's posse, which had grown to nearly 20 men overnight, pulled up short at the property line. Samuel could see the fear in their faces, the sudden uncertainty. They'd come expecting to arrest an isolated farmer, not to face down a Lakota war party. "What in the hell is this?" Morrison shouted, his voice cracking slightly with panic. White Eagle stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. "I am White Eagle of the Minneconjou Lakota. This man," he gestured toward Samuel, "is under my protection." Morrison's face flushed red with indignation and fear. "You can't just... This is American territory. I have legal authority here." "Your legal authority," White Eagle replied with cold dignity, "extends only as far as your ability to enforce it. Look around you, Sheriff. How far do you think that is today?" The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Samuel could see Morrison calculating odds, weighing his options. 20 men against 50 warriors, on open ground, with no cover. The mathematics of violence were simple and stark. Then, cutting through the tension like a knife, came a voice that made Samuel's heart skip. "Grandfather, wait." Ayanna emerged from behind the barn, walking with quiet dignity toward the two opposing forces. She'd cleaned herself up somehow. Her hair was braided, her torn dress replaced with traditional Lakota clothing that proclaimed her heritage proudly. But it was her eyes that had changed most dramatically. Gone was the frightened, hunted look of the night before. In its place was a calm strength that reminded Samuel powerfully of her grandfather. "There's been enough misunderstanding," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "It's time for truth." Ayanna walked between the two opposing forces, with the calm confidence of someone who'd found her true identity. The frightened girl Samuel had sheltered was gone, replaced by a young woman who carried herself with the dignity of her royal bloodline. "Sheriff Morrison," she said, her voice clear and strong, "you accuse me of theft. But before you make that accusation stick, there are things this town needs to hear." Morrison's hand hovered near his weapon, but the sight of 50 Lakota warriors kept him from drawing. "You can't just..." "I can speak," Ayanna interrupted firmly, "and you can listen, because the truth is going to come out today, whether you want it to or not." She reached into the leather pouch Samuel had noticed the night before and withdrew a small bundle of papers. "These are receipts, Sheriff. Every item I took from Mr. Bradley's store was paid for." She held up the papers, and Samuel could see they were indeed store receipts, carefully preserved despite her night in the storm. Bradley's face went pale. "That's impossible. You stole..." "I paid," Ayanna said firmly, "with money my grandfather gave me for trading. 2 silver dollars and 6 bits. More than enough for dried meat, bread and beans." She looked directly at Bradley. "You gave me these receipts yourself, Mr. Bradley, don't you remember?" The silence that followed was deafening. Samuel watched as understanding dawned on the faces of several townsmen. They were beginning to realize they'd been played for fools. "Then why did you run?" Morrison demanded, his voice losing some of its authority. Ayanna's expression hardened. "Because Mr. Bradley waited until I left the store, then followed me and demanded I give him back the food and keep the money as payment for other services." Her voice carried a disgust that made several of the warriors behind her shift ominously. "When I refused and threatened to tell his wife, he started shouting that I'd stolen from him." Bradley's face went from pale to crimson. "That's a lie. She's lying." "Am I?" Ayanna reached into her pouch again and withdrew a small item that made Samuel's blood boil, a woman's wedding ring. "You dropped this when you grabbed my arm, Mr. Bradley. Funny thing, it's not your wife's ring, is it? The inscription reads, 'To Mary with love,' but your wife's name is Elizabeth." The ring gleamed in the morning sunlight like an accusation. Bradley's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, while Morrison stared at the evidence with growing horror. The sheriff was beginning to realize he'd been manipulated into pursuing an innocent girl to cover up Bradley's adultery and attempted assault. White Eagle stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of absolute truth. "My granddaughter speaks with a straight tongue. She came to your store to trade honestly. Your merchant tried to force himself on her, then created lies to cover his shame when she escaped." Samuel felt a surge of pride and vindication. His instincts about Ayana had been correct. She was a good person caught in someone else's web of lies. But more than that, he was witnessing something extraordinary. Truth cutting through prejudice, like sunlight through storm clouds. Morrison looked around at his posse, seeing doubt and shame replacing the righteous anger he'd cultivated. These were mostly decent men who'd been told they were hunting a dangerous thief. Now they were discovering they'd been turned into a lynch mob to protect a would-be rapist. "This doesn't change anything," Morrison said desperately. "She's still an Indian on American land without proper papers." "Sheriff," White Eagle interrupted, his voice carrying deadly quiet, "my granddaughter has every right to be here. This land was promised to the Lakota by treaty. Your government has broken those treaties, but they still exist. More importantly," his eyes swept the assembled townsmen, "she has the right any human being should have to trade honestly, to walk safely, to be treated with basic dignity." Samuel found his voice. "Sheriff Morrison, you came to my land with lies. You threatened an innocent girl, intimidated honest citizens, and nearly caused bloodshed over one man's criminal behavior." He gestured toward Bradley, who was now trying to edge his horse toward the back of the group. "Seems to me the only crime here is the one you helped cover up." The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Samuel could see Morrison calculating, trying to find a way to salvage his authority and reputation. But the truth was out now, witnessed by too many people to suppress. Then, from the back of Morrison's group, came an unexpected voice. "Sheriff, I think we've heard enough." Deputy Jake Williams, a young man Samuel had always considered decent, spurred his horse forward. "Tom Bradley, you're under arrest for attempted assault and filing a false report." "You can't. I'm a respected businessman," Bradley protested. "You're a liar and worse," Williams replied firmly. "And it ends now." Morrison's face twisted with rage and frustration, but he was trapped by his own game. His deputy was right. The evidence was clear, and he was outnumbered 50-1 by warriors who wouldn't hesitate to fight if he pushed too far. White Eagle stepped closer to Samuel, speaking quietly enough that only he could hear. "You risked everything for my granddaughter. How can such a debt be repaid?" Samuel looked around at his farm, now protected by an honor guard of Lakota warriors, at the town officials who'd come to arrest him now facing their own reckoning, at Ayana, standing tall and proud in the morning sun. "It already has been, Chief, it already has been, already." As Bradley was taken into custody and Morrison's deflated posse prepared to leave, White Eagle made one final announcement. "Let it be known throughout this territory that Samuel Reed is a friend to the Lakota people. Any who threaten him, threaten us all." The warriors began to disperse, but not before each one rode past Samuel's porch in a gesture of respect. Ayana was the last to leave, pausing to look back at the man who'd shown her kindness when the world seemed dark. "Thank you," she said simply. Samuel nodded, feeling Martha's presence like a warm hand on his shoulder. "Take care of yourself, child. And remember, there are still decent people in this world. Don't let the bad ones make you forget that." As the last riders disappeared into the distance, Samuel stood alone in his yard, but he didn't feel lonely anymore. He'd found something he'd lost when his family died: purpose, connection, the knowledge that his choices mattered. In protecting one frightened girl, he'd rediscovered his own humanity. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the morning mist, and Samuel Reed went back to his work, no longer just surviving, but truly living once again. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the prairie wind, he could swear he heard the sound of Martha's laughter, approving of the choice he'd made. Justice, like the sun, had risen at last.